We're getting hungry. You're about to get hungrier. Did you want to say something before I begin?
I just want to say thank you. That was beautiful. And I'm looking forward to tasting memory, tapping into our culinary roots.
Thank you.
Written by Marjorie Silverman.
Thank you, my love. On Good Friday, I began my morning with leftover matzo ball soup. The dark broth prepared in a pressure cooker, steeped in chicken skin and tradition by my cousin Carol Gottlieb. The joyous, fluffy circles soaking in discs of fat. And I ended the evening with linguine con calamari, the cavities of the squid spilling out tomato sauce to be soaked up with Briar Hill pizza. This was new to me. Dough painted with sauce, covered in Parmesan and bell peppers. The Friday night ritual of the Briar Hill neighborhood, straddling steel mills and railroad tracks. Their backyard ovens perfuming the streets with a more savory smoke. This is who I am, Maria Amelia Teresa Silverman, both risen and unleavened, falling somewhere in between. As my name suggests, I'm half Italian and half Jewish. I grew up celebrating everything and eating everything. Latkes, eggplant parmesan, blintzes, kishki, pasta fagioli, caprese salad, all of it. In addition to the Southern Italian cooking of her family, my mother, Marjorie, taught herself haute French cuisine, working through Elizabeth David, Julia Child, and the rest. And then she took on Moroccan, Chinese, Czech, Indian, Russian. She mastered all of them. I grew up with tagines and woks and implements that I can't even identify now that she's gone. She was equally adept at savory cooking and baking, and this was the principal way that my mother expressed love. She wasn't as comfortable with words or physical affection, but once, when we encountered each other in the middle of the night after I had fallen asleep on the couch, I mentioned that I had had a dream of a white cake, a very tall white cake, and I drifted back to sleep. When I awoke, there was the most perfect, fluffy, white layer cake covered with coconut sitting on the kitchen table. I looked at her and exclaimed, "Did you make my dream cake?" But she just shrugged and said, "I just had some coconut I needed to use up." She made food magical. It wasn't just what she did with it. It was her appreciation for it, the history behind it, for the variety available in the world, for how it grew. When I was a small child, we had a community garden where we grew green beans and strawberries. And later we went to the farmer's market, and she would buy boxes of plum tomatoes, sorrel for soup, pears for poaching. This is still where I go to find her. I can find her in bunches of beets and Concord grapes and ristras of Thai chilies. When I am lonesome for her or I've had a bad day in general, I make pasta with simple tomato sauce. And as soon as I smell the garlic simmering in olive oil, I start to come back to myself. Do you have a food that brings you home? My friend Dale grew up during the Depression. Some days his father, a repairman, would take him to his shop while he worked. In the tin ceiling storefront, there was a potbelly stove, and for lunch, his father would take 2 cans of Chef Boyardee spaghetti and meatballs and place them on the stove. And when they were hot enough, he would slice them open and hand Dale, a 4-year-old, a heat-resistant glove used for soldering, and they would each hold their can. and eat the spaghetti with a spoon. Dale's in his 90s now, and his household dines on cheese and champagne and chocolate-covered almonds. But he still keeps a couple of cans of Chef Boyardee in his cupboard. My own father would channel his mother when he was having a rough day, and he would make chicken soup from scratch and wash the floors on his hands and knees. He made amazing breakfasts, too. Matzo brie, popovers, and German pancakes. And then I ended up marrying a picky eater. Yes, you know who that is. Daddy. When I met him in his larder, he had Captain Crunch, Pringles, Oreos, tater tots, no condiments, no spices, and no olive oil. Olive oil was in everything in my family. It was the one thing my two sides had in common. It topped blanched asparagus, cupped artichoke leaves. Thank you, Jenny, for this artichoke we have. Cold pork, goat cheese, and baby arugula. And then my husband, Bill, brings out margarine. Margarine to put on angel hair pasta with salt. Yuck. I was aghast. No offense to anyone who likes margarine. Mama was even more so when I told her. Bill, she said, have you ever heard of olive oil? And then it began. The baptism of this Irish boy, brought up on butter and turnips and Friday night fish. He went through the sacraments of haricot vert sautéed with garlic, Persian cucumbers tossed with lemon, of halibut baked in papillote, of potatoes fried in coins, of pea greens and watercress playing in a vinaigrette, of cherry tomatoes splitting open, pouring their souls into the dripping soup. All of it bathed in a bounty of olive oil, the green blood of our appetites, of our skin, of our sense, of our urns, of our ancestors. I knew my mother loved him when, in addition to the fried smelts and spaghetti alla vongole she made for the rest of us, she made him his own plain fillet of sole with plain, gulp, pasta on the Feast of the Seven Fishes. I've never been able to recreate that dinner since she died 8 years ago. During the 4 years it took to conceive Augie, we lost 14 people. 4 parents, 4 aunts, 2 uncles, 2 cousins, and 2 babies. Since then, food has become an act of reclamation, not just for me, but for Augie, who never got to know his grandparents. I am no poet in the kitchen. I gesture rudely, the stovetop splattered with sauce. I exclaim excitedly, squirting the innards of late blueberries onto the floor. I have the rudiments of language, a fridge full of summer squash, nectarines, shishito peppers, fresh mozzarella, but I'm not sure how to speak with them. I suppose I could be a good cook if I applied myself, but I always preferred to be in the kitchen when someone else was cooking. That's even what I loved about working in restaurants. And with a mother so adept, it hardly seemed worth it to try to walk in her footsteps. But I actively try to preserve what she shared with me so I can let him know where he comes from. What do you come from? A Sunday pot roast? Or candy and fried clams like our very own Naomi? Tofu and brown rice? A Dairy Queen blizzard? Or maybe chicken. Roast chicken is my husband's favorite, the one thing I don't make. The red flesh slides under the knife, splitting open sensuous summer, spilling seeds and succulents into the white bowl. This heirloom deep orange and this pale green and purple, sliced and spilling, slipping in the Greek olive oil, gliding over the curved wedges. She takes the peeler, skimming off the skin of a Persian cucumber, and then the knife again, slice, slice, slice on the wooden cutting board. I cut them on a plate, which makes a less satisfying clink. And then those two swim into the tomatoes with skips of garlic scape. And she's thunking down the back stairs in her clogs to snatch dill from her garden. And I'm opening a plastic clamshell from the market. But when I fold the sprig against my nose, it's many summers ago in another kitchen. And she is leaning her forearms on the edge of the sink as she snips the ends of haricot vert with her cinnabar nails. She is in the stripping of the husk off the naked ear. I pulled the garlic from her basket. She used to neatly mince it with her heavy cleaver. I tear it, roughly, into shards. I bring the cucumber tomato salad to him in his high chair. I want to sit in its juices instead of drink them. I can see the big bowl of it sitting on my grandma's table. I wish he could have sat at that table. He eagerly pierces a Persian with his fork, and the aroma floats up. "Oh," I exclaim slowly. "What?" he asks. "This salad makes me feel like my mother is here." I return to the kitchen, grating the Parmigiano Reggiano on her box grater, and then the zucchini is cut into coins. She rested them salted on a paper towel to soak up any excess water, but I never have the patience for that. They go into the hot oil, spitting and fighting, splattering the stovetop. They get fried golden brown as the cabinets in that old kitchen. They used to lay them back out on another paper towel or on a paper bag to absorb the oil. But I fling them onto the plate because I want every bit of them. I want the mess of the memory, the savory pain of it that marks my skin and stains my clothes. Still hot, they are coated in the fluffy, salty cheese. I bring this to him too. He is slurping from his upturned bowl, the red acid and golden fat circling each other. "I drink the soup," he says. I smile. I bring the ear of corn with the butter dripping down between the kernels and the long beans sauteed with garlic and drizzled with lemon. I can remember the drawer the corn on the cob holders were in. I can remember my grandmother soaking up that same soup with a heel of crusted bread. He's not tasting it as it was. She always used spring onions. I wait while he finishes, oil and butter slipping from his chin, humming happily over his summer feast. He looks up, his eyes shining like the oil. "What do you think?" I ask. "Makes me feel like my mother is here," he says. Augie at age 3 made me realize that even in my stories and my haphazard approximations, he is tasting me and where I come from. And his own passion for making recipes on the beach, for marshmallow quiche and skunk cake, let me know that some of them lives on in him. At Passover, I became so homesick that I threw Augie in the car and drove out to Chicago at a moment's notice. My cousin Barbie offered to show us how to make my Grandma Lil's Passover sponge cake. I never got to meet my grandparents. They were refugees from the pogroms and what is now Ukraine, emigrating at the turn of the century, and they passed away before I was born. So making this cake was like having a conversation with someone I never met. And not only my grandmother, but her mother, Clara Katz, and her mother, and all of the ancestors I never met. Neil deGrasse Tyson writes, "We've had 4,094 ancestors, each of us, over the last 400 years. 2 parents, 4 grandparents, 8 great-grandparents, 16 great-great-grandparents, 32 great-great-great-grandparents, and so on. This is how you raise the dead. On Passover, we remember that we were separate. We separate 10 eggs, golden yolks and slippery whites. We squeeze fruit from an orange, remembering the fragrance of the fruit trees in our forgotten land. We sift cake meal, seeking to clear the clumps, the stumbling stones from our past. We beat the egg whites, looking for leavening any way we can, so that we may rise beyond the heavy weight of our past. We leave the pan ungreased so that the tenacity of our people can climb the high walls erected. And once baked, we invert the cake over a soda bottle. In one of the great miracles performed for our people, the cake levitates there, clinging to the pan, stretched beyond its potential, an act of will to hold on, to raise itself so high from such a humble beginning. Once free, it stands proudly on the plate, defying all, until it is soaked in the blood of berries, bathed in collective memory. My grandmother Lillian baked these memories 10 at a time each holiday to share. 100 eggs, 100 broken promises mended together. Cousin Barbie remembers the first time she was allowed to separate the eggs, having finally graduated from pot washer. And now she carries forth this resurrection for us. There is no fat here. Nothing is easy. My son is sifting through stories. We are pouring out sugar, showering ourselves with her sweetness. A lifting of Lil, an excavation of a South Side kitchen. Silver pans standing like grave markers, balancing precariously on a bottle, as we did in so many countries and centuries. We are a miracle of air, suspended by being willing to rise. On Good Friday, on the way home from Passover, we stopped at my cousin Linda's on my Italian side, and she shared with us 2 recipes from my grandma Margie, my mother's mother, a reminder that recipes can conjure our history not just in their ingredients or flavor, but in the way they are made. The dough of the pizza rustica is hard to work, cold butter like her grudges, resistant to the forgiveness of the rolling pin, holding on to their shape, unwilling to release themselves. The crust of the risotto pie is crumbling. We have to piece it together as she did, making something out of nothing, girls in pressed white dresses and crisp bows bought on a budget. The eggs are beaten with resentment. Her sister, the favorite, sent to college over her, the smart one. I remember her loose flesh hanging, as mine does now, as her strong muscle manipulated. Whipped up, slapped down, the salami cut into slabs, fontina forced into cubes, the pecorino dragged mercilessly down the grater, and then loaded into the egg mixture and poured onto the unforgiving dough. It bakes brown like her thick skin, and it's best eaten at room temperature to allow her temper to cool. She chats with the neighbor at the side door. "Well, I says," and jots down the recipe from the radio in her round writing, and she stirs the rice with milk and lemon and laughter, vanilla bean and baseball scores. She folds in smooth ricotta, white as her satin sheets. She crosses the dough into a lattice, a path of crucifixes repeated in the pie and on her walls. That sweet and sour of the lemon zest lingers. Her generosity and defiance mingling. These pies preserve her. We slice into her stubbornness and taste her tart tongue. My hope is that you leave here very, very hungry. Maybe you go home and make some soup. Maybe you go to Hangar B if you can get in and have a fantastic omelet. Maybe you call your sister and remember your father together. Maybe you sit down and write down a recipe to send to your daughter-in-law. Maybe you write down a memory for your grandchild. Maybe you go to the movies and eat licorice like you used to when you were a child. When my son is tired or looking for comfort, he still reaches under my shirt to nurse. It's an old feeling, being cared for in that way. I hope you feel cared for today. I hope you feel inspired to care for someone else. I hope you feel connected to your family, even your found family, to your community, and to all those who gathered and cooked and ate before you and for you. After my culinary trip of rebirth in the spring, I sought out the story of the Passover sponge cake, and it turns out it didn't come from a shtetl in the Pale of Settlement at all, but from the lanes of Livorno, my Jewish ancestors having borrowed from my Italian ancestors to make this cake with a round opening, the bocca di dama, a woman's mouth, to speak to me all these centuries later to tell our story. We whip and measure and mold to remake ourselves and to remember them. Go forward in remembrance, in community, and blessed be.
Blessed be.